This is part one of a two-part series about going all in with NeoVim. It's originally a talk that I recorded during the Vim Chicago meetup. However, the audio did not work at the time, and so I had to redo it in a screencast form. And I kind of repeat this information in the beginning, but I decided to add an intro here just to say this is more of the kind of the history of NeoVim. I go through it a lot slower than I did during the meetup. So if you feel like playing this in 1.5 speed, that's fine. The second part is the part where I go into more of a live demo. And I do some live demo here and there between the slides, but if you want to see just the live demo, how I'm configuring my Vim and my plugins, feel free to skip to part 2 of this series. Hi, welcome to a screencast about going all in with NeoVim. This is a version of a talk that I gave at Vim Chicago meetup. This version is a screencast because when I recorded the version at the meetup, the audio was not working right. So going into it, first we're going to talk about what is NeoVim. We're going to talk about the different refactor goals that NeoVim has. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about some of the features that NeoVim has. And during this presentation, I'm going to go into Vim, in and out of Vim, and show you what the different features are and how I have NeoVim configured. So first, let's talk about what NeoVim is. NeoVim is a hard fork of Vim, which is focused on extensibility and usability. And it sounds a bit nebulous, but we'll go a little bit into what that means. It is an aggressive yet careful refactor of the original Vim code. And that's something that's very important because you don't want to take code like that and refactor it willy-nilly, accept any PR into the code base. You will end up with something that's unstable and contains all the features that you might not need, getting back to the same problem that the original Vim legacy has. NeoVim is literally the future of Vim. That's how they market it, and I think that's right. So my name is Dorian Carter. You can find me on doriancarter.com, at DorianEscapeClan on Twitter. I work for HashRocket. We use Vim 100% of the time when we're pairing, and that's why I'm so interested in Vim, and I think my colleagues are too. It's one of the reasons why we're hosting Vim Chicago as well. So thank you for HashRocket for sponsoring the meetup. I also run the Chicago Elixir meetup, and we are meeting this month on the 27th of the month for Firmata protocol implementation in Elixir. So if you're interested in that, please check us out at meetup.com/Chicago Elixir. Let's talk a bit about the NeoVim refactoring goals. The first goal that they mention is simplifying maintenance and encourage contributions. And it kind of goes along with the second goal, split the work between multiple developers. They want to enable advanced UIs without modifications to the core. That means that Vim will not change because a new UI has surfaced, but rather the new UI will have to adapt to a certain set of API endpoints that Vim will expose. They want to maximize extensibility. And one of the ways that they're doing that is by exposing a new plugin architecture, which we'll talk about. So let's break down the first goal, which is simplifying maintenance. The creator of AG, also known as the Silver Searcher, has created a section on his website called Vim Hole of WTF. And he shows off a function that is over 400 lines long, contains over 40 if-defs, and all it does is wait for keyboard input, and it's really interesting. So let's take a look at that. So here is this section of his site. It's jeff.greer.fm/vim if you want to check it out yourself. Excuse me. There is a lot of if-defined BOS, for example. That is, if the BOS operating system if this is a compile target, it will basically use int as opposed to static int. If there is support for the X clipboard, it will run it with this part and not that part, and so on. It makes it really difficult to read. This is like a or else, so it's like within the if statement there is another if that is dependent on a compiler flag, and that type of stuff goes on for 400 lines. It's pretty bad. So let's look at the reasons why Jeff thinks this is happening. Vim tries to be compatible with every OS, including dead ones, such as BOS, VMS, and Amiga. Features that drastically change the behavior are enabled or disabled with preprocessor flags, as we mentioned. And basically, cross-platform libraries like Libuv, which we'll talk about in a bit, did not exist when Vim was created. NeoVim does use Libuv to remove a lot of this cruft. So let's talk about Libuv. So Libuv stands for Unicorn Velociraptor Library. What it does, it's a multi-platform C library that provides support for asynchronous I/O based on event loops. It supports the following features. It has asynchronous TCP, UDP sockets, asynchronous DNS resolution, a system, file and file system operations. This is particularly important for Vim. File system events, child processes, thread pool, signal handling, high resolution clock, threading and synchronization primitives. It seems like an ideal library for something like Vim to use, and it seems like it will cut out a lot of the mess that Vim has in its code base. Vim also tries to be compatible with VI. VI is what Vim was based on. Vim is basically VI improved. So if you type :age compatible in NeoVim, you will see a message that says NVim is always non-compatible with VI. There was a lot of craft in Vim that was just to support this compatibility that a lot of modern editor users don't really care for. In addition to that, they try to bring in a bunch of sensible defaults. So when you go to :age vim-diff, let's do that right now. Here I'm in VimR. Actually, let's do that here because I think I already have that open. So I'm in iterm inside of NeoVim. I typed in :age vim diff. And what you can see here is, first of all, some of the configuration differences. So that's one of the features of NeoVim, that it has xdg config, meaning for most operating systems, it will live in the home folder under the .config folder. You will have an nvim folder that has an init.vim. So it tries to organize all of the .dot files inside of a .config folder as opposed to just dumping them all in the home directory, which is great. It talks about shared data between Vim instances, persistent session information. I don't know too much about that. It's interesting. If you do know something about that, please share some links in the comment below. And then it talks about some of the sensible defaults that Vim supports out of the box. And it took a lot of those defaults from sensible.vim by Tim Pope, which is great. This is what we're using in HashRocket too. It's kind of like our baseline. It then goes on into some more major components and user experience and so on. We're not going to go through this entire document because it's quite a bit here, but let's get back to the high level. So encouraging contributions is definitely a big goal, and I'm kind of bundling with that the split work between multiple developers. Legacy Vim, as I call it, has a BDFL. That is a tongue-in-cheek acronym for Benevolent Dictator for Life. It is usually a title given to a small number of open source software development leaders, typically project founders who retain the final say in disputes or arguments within the community. The nature of open source kind of forces this type of dictatorship to keep itself benevolent, since a strong disagreement can lead to the forking of a project under the rule of new leaders. In Vim's case, the benevolent dictator for life is Bram Molnar. Bram is particularly bright. He was able to sustain the development of Vim for the past however many years. It's hard when the community wants one thing and you want another, but that's when hard forks happen, kind of like what happened with NeoVim. So I'll give you a little bit of a background on how it all started. Matt Caniaris and Geoff Greer from FlyBits. FlyBits is a plugin that now works on NeoVim as well as other editors. It's supposed to allow you to have remote pairing sessions across different editors. So you can have your own IDE or text editor, be it VSCode or Atom, and then at the same time, the other person across the ocean can be in NeoVim, and when one person switches a file, you will see the file switched on your machine as well. You'll see their cursor and your cursor, and it's kind of like Google Docs, but for code. So Matt Caniaris and Geoff Greer seem to have paired on a plugin, and that plugin was supposed to allow that type of remote pairing in Vim, and they encountered the issue of Vim not supporting asynchronous job control. So they said, okay, let's try and figure that out. They went and opened a PR on Legacy Vim, and that PR was rejected, and they were very unhappy with the process and really frustrated about it. They try to comply and acquiesce with all the requests to support legacy systems and coding styles and so on. And basically, even after acquiescing at the end, the PR was not merged, and they felt really frustrated about it. At that point, Jeff mentions on his blog that he gave up. And he has an article that I recommend reading called Why NeoVim is Better Than Vim. Later on, not too later after that, a guy named Thiago de Arruda, a creator of NeoVim, he posted a similar pull request to Vim, and that pull request also got rejected. But instead of giving up, he decided to actually open a new project, basically hard fork Vim, call it NeoVim, and he created a BountySource campaign, which is a crowdsourcing platform, which was recently bought, I believe, by some blockchain company. But either way, BountySource is an interesting idea where you can contribute money to open source contributors, and they can get money for their work and basically take time off their work to work on open source. So he raised, what you're seeing right now is a screenshot from BountySource as it is today and with its current goals. And right now they have enough money to support development of NeoVim for 1 full day a week, for a developer to take off 1 day off their work to work on NeoVim. So the original BountySource campaign raised around $30,000. If you look at the update section on that BountySource campaign page, you'll see that it raised about $30,000, which is a really nice sizable amount, which allowed NeoVim to get to where it is today. Some of the contributors you'll see at the top as the top supporters are actually other open source contributors, and even one of them is a GUI for NeoVim. It's that cool green and blue icon in the middle. So let's look at which is which. Which one is NeoVim and which one is Vim? What do you think? As you probably guessed, the top one is NeoVim and the bottom one is Vim. Vim has 1 contributor. But that's not really true. A lot of Vim's interaction is done in old school mailing lists, where people can even mail patches as zip files. That is not the same with NeoVim, which takes the approach of a modern open source development community and manages everything inside of GitHub. So NeoVim has 363 contributors at the time of taking this screenshot. So this is an image from the Vim's contributor page. You can see Bramolnar is the sole contributor with about 2 million something additions and about 1 million removals of lines of codes and 8,000 commits. It's probably not necessarily true, because Vim was imported, probably was not in Git for its entire life. It existed for a very long time. It eventually was imported into Git and GitHub. The other thing that you'll see here is an arrow that I put on around 2015, 2016, end of 2015, beginning of 2016. And that's around when NeoVim started getting a lot of press and popularity. But overall, you'll see that the development has been fairly steady in terms of the amount of contributions, but not very high, except for towards the end of 2015. Let's look at NeoVims. So in NeoVim, you'll see there's quite a bit more contributions. The graph is a lot more lively. There's a lot of contributors, so if I were to scroll down, you'll see it's like never ending, and I have to tell GitHub to keep loading more. Another thing to make contributions a little bit better that NeoVim added is CI and tests. And that makes, especially in a code base that's written in C89, it gives you a little bit of a peace of mind. Let's talk about the contributing.md. Let's look at the one for Vim and then the one for NeoVim. This is the contributing.md for Vim. It's not very long, and it seems fairly simple, but a lot of the discussion happens in mailing lists, and They're mentioning that here actually. So if you create a pull request on GitHub, it's actually forwarded to the Vim dev mailing list. And I believe there is some sort of a bridge for that, and there is a troll at the end of the bridge. But here is one example for that. I have that subscribed here on an RSS feed, and you can see that Vim/Vim incorporate existing split vertical patch. Let's click that. So that gives you like the pull request number. So this thing basically gets sent from GitHub, and you can see here viewed on GitHub. So this is coming directly from GitHub as an integration of sorts. There really isn't much to here and to this file, and they don't really give you a lot to work with, as opposed to NeoVim, where they're really trying to help you get started. They really try to welcome new people into the community. They have issues with complexity low that you can look for. Some development guidelines you can find it directly in the help. If you want to develop your own UI, there's that here. Help dev UI. They talk about how to report problems, how to create pull requests, and one of the things they're mentioning here is creating WIP. So if I'm going to start working on a new feature, I'm going to create a WIP PR right away, and that will prevent other people from working on that same feature, because that will look on the PR list before starting to work, ideally. What Git workflow to use, using feature branches. There's the stages of WIP, like I mentioned, RFC and RDY, which is ready. RFC is request for comment. You'll see that there's a lot of discussion still. It's not like they're accepting pull requests willy-nilly. They're really trying to evaluate things and see that they're right for the future of NeoVim. And there's also some milestones that you can look at, and you can see what's completed and what's closed, and they're based on GitHub issues. So it's actually really interesting if you want to dig deeply into that. All right, so that sums it up for contributions. Let's talk a little bit about enabling advanced UIs. So Vim supplies this thing called the MessagePack RPC, which is the Vim's API. And what that means is that GUIs use that API instead of exposed functions to talk to NeoVim, as opposed to Vim basically implementing a bunch of features for different GUIs to support the different GUIs. Let's show an example of NeoVim Remote by GitHub user MHINZ. I don't know how to pronounce that. What's happening here is that there is basically a socket being assigned to a variable, which is called NVim listen address. Once that's set up, NVR can call something like remote changelog.md and give it a file name, and then it will change the file being open on NeoVim. At the same time, you can send commands, you can send insert and keys in normal mode, you can send expressions, and so on. And it allows for a very rich plugin development as well as GUI development. You can basically have Vim run as a server, send whatever the user is typing on your new GUI, and have NeoVim evaluate what the result of the file would be. So you can basically support the entire functionality of NeoVim directly in your new GUI interface. So there's a few, I'm going to talk a little bit about some popular editors like Atom and VS Code. Both of those have Vim plugins that support NeoVim. So if you open Atom and you install the Vim mode plugin, that plugin is powered by NeoVim. VSCode has the same feature. You have to enable that by telling it where the executable path for NeoVim is. But once you do that, it runs all of the Vim implementation and the Vim mode through NeoVim, which is really cool. That means it'll stay true to the core and you don't have to re-implement Vim and basically miss a few things that some users would be upset about. Let's talk about maximizing extensibility. So we mentioned the MessagePack RPC. And a contributing factor to legacy Vim's huge code bases is its exclusive support for dozens of widget toolkits for GUI interfaces. So the way NeoVim avoids that is by delegating GUI implementations to external clients, like we mentioned. So the NeoVim Vim API, the MessagePack RPC, can execute Vim commands, evaluate Vim script expressions, manipulate buffers, windows, and tabs, receive and handle editor events. And that gives it enough flexibility to allow you to create whatever GUI you want, as well as extending Vim. And you can use that MessagePack RPC from plugins as well. The other thing that it allows is creating plugins using any language that you want. So let's talk about NeoVim features. So the first one that we mentioned is modern GUIs using the MessagePack API. You can write plugins in any language, and there's really some interesting stuff. Let's go over to this is my favorite page about NeoVim, the related project page. You can reach it from the main README file. So I usually just click on Advanced UIs right here. And then it gets me here, and you can see all the different GUIs that are out there. At least the ones that have been reported. And then there's some API clients. So these are basically API wrappers for the MessagePack RPC. And you can use these languages to actually create your own plugins for NeoVim in your favorite language. So I really like Elixir, so I'll probably use this one. And they give you this cool little diagram here of how this works. And then they describe the DSL for the plugin. So you can have on event Vim enter. So when you enter Vim, the logger will spit out something. You can have a command defined, and then when that command is being called, then you will get to handle that, and you have this nvim.session, and then you can call a command from there. That's the other cool thing. It will translate just underscore echo to this. I don't know how it does that, but it's pretty cool. Probably using some macros or something. So in addition to all those, there's a new plugin architecture based on the co-processes. And the co-processes are basically, what that means is that plugins run in their own process. Each plugin runs in its own process, and it will not block Vim. So you can keep editing your text file while the plugin is running. And I will show a quick example of that with the Hacker News plugin towards the end. It also contains an embedded scriptable terminal emulator, which is one of my favorite features. It allows you to share data between editor instances, and I don't know still how to use that, but it sounds pretty cool. Lastly, it supports the XDG spec implementation. This is not an exhaustive list of all the features, and if you really want to know more, there is a way to do that from here. You just type age and vim dash features. And then you can see they talk a little bit about job control, remote plugins, which run on a new architecture. Some of the providers. So NeoVim is compiled without a ton of compilation flags like Vim. Like Vim has about 100 of those. NeoVim comes with dynamic, basically like features. So if you type check health and you wait a bit, because it does need to check Python and Ruby and Node and so on, you can see that there is, first of all, you'll find that there is a package called NeoVim. There's a gem for that. And there's an npm package for NeoVim as well. For Python, there's Python 3-NeoVim, and Python 2, similar thing. It supports clipboard, so I don't have to compile it with a clipboard flag. I don't have to compile it with Python. I can actually add Python later if I want to, simply by installing this plugin. But yeah, this is where you can see all of the different features, new features in NeoVim. The job control in NeoVim is kind of what gave it its fame. It came at a time where Vim, legacy Vim, did not have that. And actually, legacy Vim was inspired by NeoVim to create its own job control eventually, and they decided to go with a different method signature for all the things. I believe they call it job underscore control as opposed to job control. And I'm not really sure why. All the callbacks are a little bit different in their naming. Not really sure why it's that. But job control allows you to run different processes while still using Vim. Original Vim relied on the loop of inserting text in order to do any operations, and that made it really difficult for you to both type things and be able to run like synchronous linters or formatter and so on. The mouse support in NeoVim is pretty incredible. You can select text without the line numbers. You can scroll up and down buffers, which is extremely useful for something like a terminal whenever you're running your tests. The color support is pretty amazing. NeoVim supports true color, which means you can have really rich color schemes that use all the colors available on your display. And one of the color schemes that I use is Vim1, and that supports true color, and it's really great to show it off, but there's a bunch of other ones that you can use. One of the biggest weaknesses of legacy Vim, in my opinion, is tmux, that you kind of have to use tmux. And don't get me wrong, I think tmux is great in a lot of ways, especially the fact that it allows you to have remote pairing sessions using Teammate, and you can run servers in the background and all that, but it's got a lot of quirks that kind of can be annoying sometimes, like the buffer history is a little wanky. It munges environment variables. It has ever-changing mouse support in each version, so pretty much the past like 5 versions or so just like came up with their own mouse support, and you had to like change your entire configuration, so they're not backwards compatible, and it was really annoying. And really, most of the time, what you really need is to reach for a quick terminal inside the editor, like most modern editors have, and not an entire terminal multiplexer. So that's the biggest strength of NeoVim, in my opinion. the terminal. And I use it extensively every day. So let me show you a quick demo of that. So right now on the right here, I'm toggling a terminal, and I'm inside of an Elixir Nerves project, and I can run mix clean, mix compile. You can see that all of my ZSH plugins are all working within it. It's working really great. You see when it's done, I can scroll up here, scroll down, and everything's still working pretty great. Also, I can toggle it on and off. And then when I started it, it's in normal mode. So I'll have to actually press Shift A to get to the end and start typing. But I can also paste. So if I want to, let's say this was a command that I wanted, I press Y. And then here I press P, and it gets copied into the buffer. So then I can erase it if I want. I can copy stuff directly from here if I want to. It's really great. A little bit of about my history with NeoVim. I installed it kind of like around when it came out, back in 2015, and it wasn't really easy to install. You had to tap your own, you had to install your own tap on Homebrew, and then from there you had to install NeoVim, and things were not very smooth. I ended up just leaving it on my system and not really using it ever. Until about a year and a half ago, when I decided to give it a shot again. I turn it on, try to symlink my VIPRPC files and just check it out. But it had some compatibility issues with one of my plugins, and at that point I just decided to go back to Vim because it was easier to deal with that than to actually slow me down on some of my projects that I'm working on. So I decided to go back to legacy Vim. So in the past 4 months, I've been using NeoVim full-time. Just decided to give it another try, and I don't think I'll ever go back to legacy Vim unless I have a really compelling reason to. In terms of compatibility, there has been 0 issues whatsoever. In fact, I was able to bring in more plugins and add more functionality to Vim that I didn't have before. So I'm really happy with NeoVim, and it allowed me to get rid of Tmux and use a GUI. I like using VMR on a Mac. It's really nice and really fast. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. So the next part is about going all in. If you type this command into your terminal using Zash, then whenever you type Vim, NeoVim will fire up and everything will look the same. You won't even notice for the most part. Except you'll have new features and you'll know that there's a lot more people contributing to the editor that you're using. To back it up, if you type command space Vim, that will run the original Vim without the alias. It will ignore the alias. So if you want to switch from Vim to NVim, you can run :help nvim-from-vim inside of NeoVim. And there's some instructions there, and they're a tiny bit more complicated than what I'm doing, which is just brew install NeoVim and then symlink the VIPRPC file into this location. And that's all you need. Let's talk a little bit about the plugins that I'm using. I'm going to talk about them at a high level, and then I'm going to dive into each one and show a little bit of a demo. NeoTerm is a wrapper around Vim's terminal. It provides some really nifty features such as quick toggle for the terminal, adding REPL support, and some more interesting features. like running tests. Vim tests actually uses NeoTerm, but you can also use iTerm or whatever else you want to use, even Tmux, to run your tests. And it's really flexible, and I really like that it works with NeoTerm. In terms of auto-completion, you have a few options out there that are really, really good for NeoVim, and they use the asynchronous job control. They do a very good job of that. One of them is dioplit.nvim. You can run that on legacy Vim. Some things still work on legacy Vim, but you will need a compatibility layer, which means that's another plugin. And there is no guarantee that that thing will not break over time or that people will stop using it. I personally use NVim Completion Manager. It is a remote plugin written in Python using a lot of NeoVim's features, and it is extremely fast. It creates a new process for each one of your sources. So if you can imagine, a completion manager is using a plugin for each language. So if you have Ruby code, it will use something for Ruby, and if you have C code, it will use something for C. And each one of those is considered a source. So whenever it tries to get a new list of suggestions of what to show the user, it needs to hit each one of those sources and then get all this data and display it back. Of course, filter it and then do more stuff with it. So it runs each one of those in a separate process. Each one of the sources in a separate process, and that makes it really, really fast and really responsive, and that's why I like it a lot. For those of you who don't like Python plugins for some reason, although with NeoVim there really isn't a lot of a reason not to, like you don't have to recompile Vim for that, you can use Asyncoplete. Asyncoplete is based on NVim Completion Manager, but it's done without the Python dependency. It's in pure Vim script. I'm going to show you another cool thing that NeoVim can do with a plugin. It's called WebComplete. And WebComplete, so if you Google something, for example, the Bluebird API, as you can see in this demo, basically Dioplit will use that as a source, and then it will copy stuff from the web and use that as a completion source for you. You can do the same thing from Tmux and so on. That's extremely powerful. And right now it only works with Chrome. One thing that I'm using is a language client NeoVim. If you ever heard about language clients, they are, or basically language servers. Language servers are, there's an RFC implementation for a language server, and what that does is it provides an ability for a language to expose an API, a public API of how to access completion sources given a certain command and in a certain context, like what would be the next thing that the user might type. In addition, they allow you to have a jump to definition and more information, like static information about the language. So that's the plugin I use. It's specifically for NeoVim. I also use Ale. Ale is an asynchronous linter, and what it does is it runs linters on your file as you type. You don't have to save the file. You just type it, and Vim will let you know if there is a problem with the code that you wrote. Like, for example, if you define a variable and never use it, it will let you know about it. If you have a compilation error, it will tell you about that as well. And it supports, it's really like batteries included. It supports all kinds of different languages. For those of you who've used Tmux before, you might really like NVMux. So NVMux allows you to use your Vim shortcuts, your Tmux shortcuts, to move around between buffers and windows, and it allows you to create new windows and so on. So NVMux is a really cool plugin. Its configuration is a little bit odd. It uses Lua that you put in your VIPRPC, and I'll show you some of that. So in the next section, I will show you basically my VIPRPC setup, including the different plugins that I'm using, And this is going to be a separate video just for easier editing, and so that people who already know about NeoVim can basically skip just directly to that video if they just want to see a bunch of plugins and configurations.